As Edward's health failed, Wallis essentially became his full-time carer. She supported him in ensuring that he received all the medical attention that he required, that he received all the care that he required, and really in easing his passage at the end of his life.
The last few years of Edward's life, he was, yes, he was quite ill and quite frail, but I think they were happy years for him. He had Wallace, he had his pugs. You know, according to Joanna Schutz, who was there with the Windsors during those last years, there was such a strong sense of devotion between them. I mean, every morning, Edward's waking words are, "Is the Duchess awake? Can I see her?" She was his everything. So even though he knew he was fading, he still had the love of the woman that meant so much to him. However, he also did have quite a lot of anxiety about what was going to happen to her post his death, because he knew that the royal family probably weren't going to be that nice to her. They didn't have any children, so he relied on his friends, and he told various people that I interviewed that he was concerned about what was going to happen to Wallis because he couldn't offer her protection in death.
The Duchess prefers to remain my silent partner in front of the microphone, but I can tell you how happy she has been to be home again.
In the last years before his death, Edward made a number of trips to the United Kingdom with his wife for events, notably the death of his sister Mary. During these trips, again, there was a lot of media attention on the Windsors. They remained, and he in particular remained a popular figure right through until the end of his life. But he had this image now of a slightly sad-looking figure on the margins of the royal family, of unfulfilled potential in many respects.
I think by the last years of Edward's life, when he had various forms of cancer and he was physically very debilitated, I think that Wallis was, if not a physical help to him, at least a sort of emotional help to him. Because by this stage, they'd been through so much together that they had this companionship of many decades standing. And people who would have dinners or parties with them reported that she would be making an effort for the party to be kept going. And in a sense, you can see that even decades after her heyday, she was always somebody who was living by the standards of her era, making sure everyone had the best wine, the best cocktails and so on. But I think that by the end of Edward's life, she knew that when he died, she'd be seen as a very diminished figure, and that's exactly what happened.
The public reaction when he died was split, much as had been the case at the time of the abdication, much as had been the case at the time of his marriage to Wallis. There were some sections of society that really celebrated Edward as a figure that had a great deal of sympathy for what he'd gone through, the fact that he'd had to renounce the throne in order to marry the woman he loved. There were other sections of society that saw him as something of a scoundrel, that had failed in his efforts to put national duty ahead of personal gratification.
When Wallis returned to England for Edward's funeral, which is what he wanted, I think the absolute irony of it was that the royal family gave her everything that would have meant so much to her husband in his life, but in his death she didn't care. So the Queen sent Lord Mountbatten to Heathrow to collect her. I thought it was a very touching detail that the Queen sent outriders and they blocked all the traffic on the drive coming back to Heathrow so that the grieving widow would never be seen at traffic lights and people would just stare in at her. The day before the Duke's funeral was the Trooping of the Colour, and the Queen asked Wallis would she like to go in the state carriage, astonishingly, with the Queen Mother. And Wallis said no. I mean, it was too little too late. It would have given her husband so much pleasure, but she didn't care about any of that. What she wanted was for him to have been acknowledged and for them both to have been acknowledged in his lifetime. So I think one of the most tragic photographs is the photograph of the Duchess of Windsor looking out of the window at Buckingham Palace over the Trooping of the Colour, and there is such pain etched into her face, and she looks so lonely because she was alone when she was amongst the royal family, and she knew she had to go through this because it's what Edward had decreed. All the funeral arrangements he'd agreed with the Queen at a prior event, so she had to honour her husband's wishes. But I mean, it would have been unbearable for her. And then the very sad figure of the grieving widow going up the steps. The Queen had kindly sent one of her private aircrafts to fly Wallace home, and she walks up those steps alone, and you know she's returning to a life in Paris alone.